The snow had been falling for 6 hours when Corporal Yenny Draz found the girl. She was sitting against the base of the eastern watchtower with her knees pulled to her chest and her bare feet blue against the ice. Not frost blue, not cold blue. A deep, resonant cobalt that had nothing to do with temperature, because the temperature out here on the Aran shelf would have killed any ordinary child 3 hours ago. Yenny almost stepped past her. The girl was so still she looked like debris, like a scrap of canvas torn from one of the garrison tents and left to fill with snow. But then the girl blinked, slow, deliberate, like someone surfacing from a very deep place. And Yenny Draz, who had served 8 years on 4 contested frontier postings and never once reported anything she couldn't explain, stopped walking and said, very quietly, "Oh." The girl's eyes were ordinary brown. That was the first thing. Whatever was wrong with her feet, whatever strange pigmentation ran beneath her skin like deep-water bioluminescence, her eyes were utterly, completely human. Wide, confused, and full of something that was not quite pain and not quite grief and sat in the precise territory between them that has no name in any language Yenny knew. She was crying, had been for a while. By the look of it, the tracks on her cheeks had frozen into twin pale lines. But she wasn't making any sound. She just sat in the snow with her cobalt feet and her brown eyes and cried silently. And the snow came down on her like the world was trying to bury something it hadn't finished deciding whether to keep. Yenny crouched down. Hey, look at me." The girl looked at her. "What's your name?" Nothing, not defiance, not fear. Just the expression of someone who has reached very far back into themselves for something specific and found only distance. "Okay," Yenny shrugged out of her outer jacket. "Okay, that's fine. We'll figure the rest out later." She wrapped the jacket around the girl and lifted her, and the girl weighed almost nothing, which was the second wrong thing, and her skin was not cold at all, which was the third. Commander Escarel had been running the Aran Shelf garrison for 3 years, which meant she had seen equipment failures, supply route collapses, 2 minor insurrections among the work crews, and 1 very memorable incident involving a cook, a thermal drill, and a frost bear that had become something of an outpost legend. She had not seen anything that prepared her for the report Yenny Draz delivered at 300 hours. 1 unidentified juvenile female, approximate age 8 to 11, found outside the eastern perimeter, no ID tags, no cold weather gear, no tracks in the snow leading to her position. That last part was what lodged in Rel's chest like a splinter. No tracks. She was just sitting there, Yenny said, like she'd always been there. Like the snow had grown her. Rel looked through the infirmary window at the girl, who was now wrapped in 3 blankets and drinking hot broth from a metal cup with both hands, and looking at the far wall with the polite, distant attention of someone sitting in a waiting room whose appointment is in another century. "The feet," Rel said. "Medic says it's not frostbite, not hypothermia. He ran the panel twice. Her core temp is 37.1, she's fine. Physiologically, she is completely, absolutely fine." Yenny paused. "The coloration is spreading, though. It was just her feet when I brought her in. Now it's up to her knees." Rel pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. Behind her, through the garrison's reinforced observation port, the Aran Shelf stretched out white and featureless under a sky that had been, for the past 72 hours, doing something it had never done in recorded meteorological history. It wasn't clouds. The garrison's atmospheric sensors kept insisting it wasn't clouds. It was something above clouds, a slow, vast, structural presence that had been lowering itself toward the shelf with the patience of something that did not experience urgency as a concept. "Get Harrow," Rel said. "Get him out of bed and get him in here." Chief Science Officer Harrow was 61 years old, had 3 doctorates, and was the only person on the garrison who had read the full classified briefing on what the survey teams had found beneath the Aran ice 4 years ago. He arrived in the infirmary 11 minutes later with his gray hair unflattened, and his eyes carrying the particular alertness of a man who had been lying awake waiting to be needed. He looked at the girl. He looked at her feet. He sat down on the nearest available surface, which happened to be a medical supply crate, and was quiet for a long time. "Sir," Yenny said. "I know what she is," Harrow said. He said it the way you say things you have spent years hoping you would never have to say. Flat and tired and with nothing left over for drama. Or, "I know what she might be. I need to run some tests. I need her cooperation for that, and she'll have to be willing. Don't force anything. Don't frighten her." He stood up. "And whatever you do, do not let her out of this garrison until I've had a chance to." The alarm went off. Not the garrison standard alert system. A low, procedural tone for equipment faults. A 2-pulse sequence for weather events. This was something the alarm system had never done before. A sustained, atonal wail that dropped a half step every 4 seconds as if it were slowly giving up. The garrison's communications array had just lit up across 17 frequencies simultaneously. Every one of them was broadcasting the same signal. It wasn't in any human language. It wasn't in any format the translation systems recognized. But the intent of it, the sheer, oppressive directional weight of it, was as legible as a fist pressed against a door. "Give her back." The garrison had 41 personnel. That morning, over breakfast that no one really ate, Rel laid it out plainly, because she had learned over 8 years of frontier command that people function better with facts than with managed uncertainty. "We have an unknown presence approximately 11 kilometers above our position. It has been descending at a rate that will bring it to surface level in approximately 18 hours. It is broadcasting on all frequencies. The broadcast appears to be a demand for return of the juvenile currently in our infirmary." Rel set her hands flat on the table. "I have sent 4 requests for clarification and received no response. I have sent 2 distress signals to the relay network. I do not know if they got through. The atmospheric interference has degraded our long-range comms by 60%. She let that sit. "What do we do?" asked Sergeant Paul Vant, who was 24 and from a river town in the southern basin, and had joined frontier service because the pay was good, and nobody had told him about days like this one. "We don't give her up," Yenny said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out of her the way the instinctive, non-negotiable things do, not a decision so much as a recognition of something that had already been decided somewhere below conscious thought. "She's a child. She's a child and she's frightened, and she can't even tell us her name." "She might not be," someone started. "She's a child," Yenny said again, and something in her voice closed the sentence off completely. Rel let the silence settle. Then she said, "We don't give her up, but I need everyone clear-headed about what that means. We are a research and support garrison. We have small arms, 1 medium battery that we've never fired in live conditions, and enough provisions for 14 days. She looked around the table at 40 people who were watching her with the expression of people who have just realized that the story they're living in is not the story they signed up for. "It means we do our jobs. It means we stay calm. And it means we trust Harrow to figure out what's actually happening before those 18 hours run out." Harrow, at the end of the table, was looking at his hands. "Harrow," Rel said. "I need more time with the girl," he said. Her name, it turned out, was something that could not be reproduced by human vocal anatomy. But she accepted the name Myra without objection, with a small, precise nod, the way you accept an imperfect translation and decide to work with it rather than get stuck on accuracy. Harrow sat with her for 6 hours. He did not run the tests he'd intended. He had brought instruments, a genetic scanner, a neurological mapping kit, a full-spectrum biometric suite, and he set them all aside after the first 20 minutes because it became clear almost immediately that the girl was not confused. She was not in shock. She was not suffering from amnesia exactly. She was doing something more deliberate than that. She was hiding something inside her own memory, folding it away. Layering ordinary, unremarkable recollections over the top of something vast and specific. The way you'd cover a hole in the ice with branches to keep anything from falling through it or finding it. What she could give him, she gave willingly. She knew what hot broth was. She knew what snow was. She could draw, with a borrowed stylus, the shape of a flower and the shape of a mountain and the shape of a face. The face had 7 features instead of 5, and the mouth was in the wrong place, but it was recognizably a face. When Harrow showed her a star chart, she touched 6 of the markers with her small finger and then stopped and looked at him with an expression of such careful, measuring consideration, as if deciding whether he was the kind of person you could trust with a very large and very fragile thing, that Harrow had to look away. "You know where you're from," he said. She tilted her head. "You know what's up there." He gestured at the ceiling, meaning the sky, meaning the slow descending presence above them. Her jaw tightened. The cobalt had spread further while they sat together. It was past her hips now, climbing her torso in branching patterns like frost flowers on glass, beautiful and alarming in equal measure. She pulled her blanket tighter and looked at the floor. "I'm not going to make you tell me," Harrow said. "I'm not going to give you to them." He thought about how to say the next thing. He was a scientist. He was not, by training or temperament, a man who relied on intuition. But there are moments when the data is insufficient and all you have left is what your gut says about the person sitting across from you. "But I think you have something in you that they want. And I think you came here on purpose. I think you found us on purpose. And I think the reason you're hiding the big thing inside the small things, inside the flowers and the mountain and the face, is because you're waiting. You're waiting to find out if we're worth giving it to." The girl looked up. She reached into the pocket of the borrowed garrison jacket she was wearing, rummaging past the cough drops and the stylus and the folded maintenance schedule some technician had left in there. And she produced, from some interior space that Harrow was reasonably certain the jacket did not actually contain, a small object. It was roughly spherical. It was warm. It pulsed with the same cobalt light that was climbing her skin, but slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. She set it in his palm. She folded his fingers around it. And then she did the thing that unmade Harrow's composure entirely. She hummed. 4 notes descending, then a 5th that resolved into something so much larger than itself that Harrow felt it in his sternum. It wasn't a melody he recognized. It wasn't from any human musical tradition, but it was unambiguously a lullaby. He could feel it in his bones the way you feel all lullabies, regardless of language, that specific, ancient intent of one being trying to tell another that it is safe, that the dark is temporary, that someone is present and will remain. Harrow sat with a warm cobalt sphere in his closed fist and tears on his face that he couldn't quite account for. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'll try to deserve it." 12 hours left. The presence above the shelf had stopped descending. Not retreating, it had simply paused, which was in some ways worse than continued approach, because a pause implied decision-making. It implied something up there was weighing options. The broadcasts had changed. They were still on all frequencies, still untranslatable by the garrison systems, but the tone of them had shifted from demand to something more like pressure. The way you press a bruise to find out how deep it goes. Rel had used the time to prepare every defense the garrison had, which took 4 hours because the garrison had not been built for defense. It had been built for extended habitation in an inhospitable environment, which meant the walls were thick and the insulation was excellent, and none of it was rated for anything more threatening than a blizzard. She had also sent 3 more distress signals and received from the second one a partial response. Garbled, fragmentary, unmistakably human. 2 words repeating, coming, hold. She didn't know who was coming or when. But she put it in the general communications log where anyone could read it, because hope is a resource and resources should be distributed to the people who will use them best. Yenny had not slept. She had stationed herself outside the infirmary on a folding chair with a cup of cold coffee and a rifle she wasn't sure would do anything useful, and had read the same page of the same maintenance manual 4 times without retaining a word of it. Every hour or so she would look through the window at Myra. Myra was usually asleep, or something that looked like sleep, her eyes closed, her breathing slow, the cobalt patterns on her skin shifting and reforming like clouds photographed in time-lapse. Once, just before the 10-hour mark, Myra opened her eyes and looked directly at the window as if she'd known Yenny was there, and smiled. It was a child's smile, unambiguous and specific and aimed. Yenny put her coffee down and pressed her hand flat against the glass. Myra pressed her hand against the glass from the other side. Human gesture. Completely, specifically, irreducibly human. Yenny didn't know where Myra had learned it, or how old it was in her, or what it meant against the backdrop of cobalt light and alien broadcasts, and a presence the size of a city block sitting in the clouds above them. It didn't matter, it meant exactly what it always meant. I see you, I know you're there, I'm not alone. Neither am I, Yenny said to the glass. Neither are you. At the 9-hour mark, the thing above the shelf sent something new. Not a broadcast, not a signal, something physical, a probe, Harrow said, examining the readings with the detached precision of a man who has decided that the only thing between him and complete panic is the next measurement. It entered the garrison's sensor range from directly above, descended through 3 kilometers of atmosphere in 11 seconds, and stopped 60 meters above the eastern watchtower, where Yenny had found the girl. It was not large, a sphere, roughly 2 meters across, the exact cobalt blue of Myra's skin. It hung in the falling snow and did nothing for 4 minutes. Then it projected an image into the air in front of the eastern wall. Not a hologram exactly, more like a manipulation of the light itself. The photons rearranged into form with a precision that made Harrow make a small, involuntary sound of scientific anguish at not having better instruments. The image was of Myra. Not current Myra, not the child in the borrowed garrison jacket with the cobalt patterns on her skin. This was an older image, or maybe a deeper one. A Myra without the borrowed clothes, without the careful layering of small memories over the large one, without the lullaby and the sphere and the choosing. This was a Myra who looked like what she actually was. Not a child, or not only a child, but a vessel. Something very old wearing the shape of something young. The image radiated authority the way a stone radiates warmth, slowly, persistently, with no need for permission. Then the image spoke in the garrison's own broadcast frequency in accented but entirely functional English. The keeper is ours. She carries what was taken from our archive. Return her and the settlement will not be disturbed. This is the first asking. Rel stood on the eastern wall with the snow in her hair and looked at the image for a long moment. Then she said, into the garrison-wide channel, Harrow, tell me you have something. Harrow's voice came back strained and fast. I have the beginning of something. I need 2 more hours. You have 1. Then I need you to buy me 1 hour. Rel pressed her thumb against the exterior comms panel, which had never been used for anything more than calling the maintenance crews in from the field. She cleared her throat. She thought about what it meant to talk to something that had crossed the distance between stars carrying this kind of patience and this kind of certainty. She thought about 41 people behind her and 1 child in the infirmary and 1 partial distress response that said coming, hold. She pressed the transmit key. This is Commander Eska Rel, Aaron Shelf Garrison, United Frontier Authority. I hear your claim. I am not in a position to respond to it at this time. I require verification of the legal and biological status of the individual you are requesting before any transfer can be considered. I am formally requesting a stay of action pending review. The image tilted its head, exactly the way Myra did, the specific angle, the precise pause. You are invoking procedure. I'm invoking what I have, Rel said. There was a silence of approximately 12 seconds, which Rel spent being very aware of her own heartbeat. Then the image said, "One standard measure." Then the second asking begins. It dissolved, the probe remained. Rel turned to the garrison wall behind her, where 8 people were standing at various degrees of military readiness and watching her. She looked at them looking at her. She had kept the channel open. All 41 of them had heard that exchange. 1 hour, she said. Let's not waste it. Inside the infirmary, Myra had woken up. She was sitting cross-legged on the medical cot with the cobalt sphere in her hands, turning it over and over with a focus that suggested she was either examining it or saying goodbye to it. Harrow sat across from her with every recording device he had running and tried to ask the right questions in the right order. "The archive," he said. "The thing they said you took, is that what you're carrying, what you gave me?" She looked at the sphere, then at him. Then slowly she shook her head. The expression on her face was complex, fond and mournful and faintly amused, like someone listening to a story they know the ending of. She pointed to the sphere, and then she pointed to her own sternum. "It's not what you're carrying," Harrow said. It's a copy, a key, something that points to what's actually." He stopped. He looked at her face. He thought about the lullaby and the measuring look she'd given him before she decided to trust him, and the way she'd found her way here across 11 kilometers of open shelf ice with no tracks. He thought about the name the presence had used, the Keeper. "It's inside you," he said. "The archive. It's not a device. It's not a storage medium. It's biological. It's in your memory." She touched the side of her own head, gently. "The things you're hiding," he said. "The small memories over the big ones, that's not trauma, that's encryption. You've been protecting it." She nodded. "And you can transfer it." He thought about the sphere again, the warmth of it in his palm, the 4 descending notes. "You can give it to someone, but you have to choose. You have to decide they're worth it." She looked at him for a very long time. The cobalt on her skin was moving faster now, the branching patterns reaching her shoulders, the base of her neck. It wasn't hurting her. He was nearly certain it wasn't hurting her, but it was running out. Whatever biological process had brought her here, it had a limit. "What's in it?" he asked softly. "The archive, what does it hold?" She picked up the stylus from the cot beside her and reached past him for the notepad on his instrument cart. She drew quickly and with great precision. She had been drawing since she arrived, and her spatial rendering was extraordinary, as if the translation between mind and line had no friction in her. In 40 seconds she had produced something that it took Harrow another 20 seconds to understand. A map. Not of the shelf, not of this planet. A map of relationship, objects in space and the lines between them, the distances, the patterns. A map of which suns had worlds circling them that had been lived on. A map of where intelligence had arisen and where it had been extinguished and where it was still, against all odds, carrying on. In the lower right quadrant of the map, marked with a small symbol that Harrow needed a moment to recognize as a sun, was a cluster of 4 stars. Between them, a single world. Next to the world, in the girl's careful hand, a face with 5 features in the right places. "That's us," Harrow said. His voice came out very strange. She nodded. He looked at the map. He counted the worlds that were marked as extinguished. He counted the worlds that were marked as active. He felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the Aran shelf. "The things that are up there," he said, "they don't want the archive because it's theirs, or not only because it's theirs." He met her eyes. "They want it because it tells them where to go next." She looked at him without blinking. "And you've been carrying it for how long?" She set down the stylus. She opened her small hands and looked at them, both of them, palms up, the cobalt light pulsing in the creases of her fingers. Then she made a gesture that Harrow's mind resisted for a moment before accepting, the slow, circular sweep of someone indicating everything. Not this room. Not this garrison. Everything. All of it. "Longer than the kingdom," he said. It wasn't a question. She closed her hands. The hour ran out at 14:47 hours on the 15th of the 3rd month, which was an unremarkable date that would later be remembered as the beginning of several things. The probe above the eastern wall descended to 30 meters, and the presence above the shelf descended with it, and the scale of it became visible through the atmospheric haze. Not a ship in any shape that suggested the builders had ever needed to enter an atmosphere before. All geometry and cold light, so large that the garrison's eastern sensors couldn't capture it in a single frame. The garrison's medium battery swiveled toward it, and Corporal Vant had both hands on the firing controls and was looking at Commander Rel. Rel was looking at the probe. The image reformed, the keeper that was Myra, tall and certain and ancient in a child's borrowed skin. The standard measure has elapsed. The keeper will be transferred to our custody, or the settlement will be absorbed. Absorbed, Rel said. Define absorbed. Restructured. The organic components will not be preserved. Rel turned to look through the reinforced wall window at the garrison behind her. She could see the corridor that led to the infirmary. She could not see Yenny Draz from here, but she knew exactly where Yenny was standing. She knew exactly what Yenny's answer was. She had known it since 300 hours, when Yenny had wrapped an unconscious child in her jacket without asking permission and carried her in out of the snow. She turned back to the image. No, she said. You are 41, the image said. You have one battery of insufficient yield and small personal weapons. You have no reinforcement and no capacity to resist. We have enough to make this complicated, Rel said. And we're going to. Why? The image said. It wasn't quite a question. It was the tone of something genuinely trying to understand a data point that doesn't fit the model. She is not yours. Her survival has no material benefit to your settlement. Your resistance achieves nothing statistically significant. Rel thought about that. She thought about it seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. 41 people in one borrowed jacket and a child who had chosen, out of everything and everywhere, to sit down in the snow outside this specific garrison and wait to be found. And Yenny Draz, who had never once in her life walked past something in need of the jacket off her back. She sat down in the snow and cried, Rel said. We found her, that's it. That's the whole reason. There isn't a more complicated one. The image was silent for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a very long time when something the size of a city block is deciding what to do with you. This is an insufficient basis for defiance. Yeah, Rel said, and yet. The battery fired at 15:02 hours. It did not destroy the probe. It was never going to destroy the probe. But it did something more important. It bought Harrow 12 more minutes, because the burst of interference it generated when it hit the probe's field scrambled the presence's external sensor, net long enough for Harrow to get Myra out of the infirmary and down into the garrison's deep storage sublevel, which was the only space in the building with sufficient electromagnetic shielding to buy them a few minutes of signal isolation. It was Yenny who carried her. The cobalt was up to Myra's jaw now, branching into her hairline, tracing the architecture of something very old and very patient across her skin. She was awake and calm. She had put the sphere in Yenny's jacket pocket. The jacket Yenny had retrieved from the infirmary and put back on because it seemed right, and she had her hand in Yenny's hand, and she walked without stumbling. I've got you, Yenny said in the stairwell in the cold. Myra looked up at her, squeezed once. The sublevel was cramped and smelled of machine oil and cold metal. Harrow had brought his instruments and his notepad and the map. He had also brought 2 other people, Lieutenant Cale Ohm, who was the garrison's best systems analyst, and Private Sina Ward, who was the garrison's worst card player and most reliable person in a crisis, which were not correlated attributes but both mattered right now. Here's what I know, Harrow said. His voice was steady. His hands were not. She carries a biological archive. It has been in her lineage for a time scale I cannot accurately estimate and will not try to. It is a map, a relational map of inhabited worlds. The entity above us wants it not because they're the rightful custodians, but because it tells them where to go next. He looked around. If she gives it up and they get it, there is a very short list of outcomes for anyone on this map. Including us, Ohm said. Including everyone, Harrow said. So what do we do with that? Vant asked from the doorway. He'd followed them down without being asked. She can transfer it, Harrow said. She can copy the archive into a new carrier. A human nervous system is apparently compatible. The compatibility is part of why she came here. Part of why she found us. He looked at Myra. But the carrier has to choose. It has to understand what it's taking on. I need someone who. Me, said Yenny. She said it the same way she'd said she wouldn't give up the girl. Not a decision. A recognition of something that had already settled into place without asking her permission. Yenny. She's been holding my hand for the last 4 minutes, Yenny said. I think she already decided. I think she's been deciding since the infirmary window. She looked at Myra. Am I right? Myra looked at her with those completely ordinary brown eyes. She reached into Yenny's jacket pocket and took back the sphere. She held it between them. She hummed the 4 descending notes and the 5th one that resolved into something larger than itself. The thing she was offering, Harrow had tried to explain this to Yenny in the stairwell and failed to do it justice, was not a burden exactly, not a weapon exactly. It was a record, the largest record ever kept, every world that had ever held a mind, every civilization that had burned or faded or been extinguished, every piece of navigational intelligence about where life persisted and where the things above them might go looking. It was the kind of knowledge that changes what you are when you hold it. Not because it gives you power, because it gives you perspective. Because once you know the full shape of what can be lost, you cannot unknow it. Okay, Yenny said to the sphere and the girl and the 4 descending notes. Okay, give it to me. What happened next was not dramatic. That was the thing nobody who wasn't present would fully believe afterward. There was no light show, no transformation, no moment of visible transcendence. Myra pressed the sphere into Yenny's hands. She hummed, and Yenny felt something move through her like the first real breath of spring air after a winter that has gone on too long, not painful, not overwhelming, but immense. A vast and quiet immensity. The way a library feels when you are very young and understand for the first time that all those books contain worlds. The cobalt left Myra's skin in 4 seconds. It didn't transfer to Yenny. It simply resolved, like ice melting not into water but into light, into warmth, into the settled quiet of something that has completed the journey it set out on. Myra looked at her own hands. She opened them. She looked up at Yenny, and her face did something complicated and private, and then settled into an expression of such profound, simple relief that Harrow had to look at the wall. Above them the garrison shook. The presence had breached the outer perimeter. Rel's voice came through the sublevel speaker, steady, clear, doing the job. Eastern wall compromised. They're running a proximity extraction sweep. They're looking for her. Sublevel has maybe 4 minutes of shielding left. Harrow, whatever you've got, we need it now. Harrow looked at Yenny. Yenny was holding the sphere in both hands and looking at the middle distance with an expression he had no clinical framework for. Yenny. I can feel it, she said, all of it. I can feel all of it, she blinked, focused. They can't find it anymore, the archive. They're scanning for Myra's biological signature and it's not there anymore and they can't. She stopped. Something moved across her face. They know it's been transferred. They're recalibrating. How long do we have? Not long, they'll find the new signature eventually, but it's human now, it reads human. She looked at him. How far can they track a human signal into human biology? Do they have that resolution? Harrow thought about this very fast. Not without physical access, not from distance. The archive is in your nervous system now, it's distributed, it's not a discrete object anymore. They'd have to. They'd have to capture me, Yenny said. Which they're not going to do. She stood up. She put the sphere in her jacket pocket next to the cough drops. She looked at Myra, who was watching her with the calm attentiveness of someone who has set down something very heavy and is watching someone else pick it up. I want you out of here, she said to the girl. Whatever Harrow has set up, wherever you go from here, I want you gone and safe. Myra nodded. And I want what's your real name, Yenny asked. Not what we can say, just what it is. Myra tilted her head. She hummed a note, single, clear, 6 syllables of resonance that existed below the threshold of language and above the threshold of music. Yenny heard it with her ears and with something that was not quite her ears, and she felt it settle into her the way the archive had settled. Not as information, as recognition. Yeah, she said softly. Yeah, okay, that's a good name. She turned to the door. Harrow, get her out. Get everyone who's not armed to the secondary shelters. I'll draw them off. Yenny, you can't. I've been drawing things off since I was 8 years old, she said, and pulled the door open. That's a human skill. We're very good at it. What she did in the next 47 minutes is part of the record that was eventually, after much argument about classification and public interest, and the precise legal definition of a first contact event, released in full. It is available for anyone to read. The summary cannot do it justice, and the summary is not the point. The point is this. The Presence had spent an estimated 600 years pursuing the archive across 7 inhabited systems. It had a tracking methodology that had never failed. It had sensor arrays of extraordinary sophistication. It had patience and certainty and the advantage of altitude, and it was operating on the reasonable assumption that the carrier of the archive would behave as every previous carrier had behaved, minimizing exposure, seeking concealment, waiting for rescue. Yenny Draz did not conceal herself. She walked out onto the Aran shelf in the snow, in the full range of every sensor the Presence carried, and she talked. She talked into every broadcast frequency simultaneously using the garrison's external array, which was designed for weather reporting and had never been used for anything remotely like this. She talked about the archive. She described what she held, not its contents, not the information, but its shape, the scope of it. The fact that it was real and that it was in her, and that getting it back was going to be exactly as difficult as getting it from a human who had decided that some things are worth dying for rather than handing over to something that doesn't understand why the record needs to exist. The Presence listened. She also talked about the map, the worlds marked active, the worlds marked extinguished, the worlds that were on the map not yet visited. She talked about the arithmetic of it with a precision that surprised even her. The archive was working through her, not like possession, like literacy, like knowing the words to a song you didn't know you knew. You've been doing this a long time, she said to the sky, to the Presence, to the cold light descending. A very long time, and you're very good at it, pursuit, pressure, the waiting kind of violence, and every single species you found, every carrier you chased, you knew what they'd do, because you made them do it. You made pursuit and concealment the only options, hide or be taken. She stood in the snow with her boots soaking through and her face gone numb from cold. But we're not doing that. I'm standing here in the open telling you exactly where the archive is and exactly why you're not getting it. And I can see from the sensor readings that this is genuinely new information for you. You don't have a protocol for this. She had the garrison systems analyst reading her the sensor returns in real time. The Presence above was not hesitating. It was recalculating. It was doing something that 600 years of pursuit had apparently not required it to do, adjusting. The archive isn't something you own, she said. It's a record of what exists, every world, every mind, everything that's still carrying on. And the fact that it's in me now, a human, a person who you don't have any intelligence on, means you don't know what I'll do with it, where I'll take it. What happens when 41 people in a garrison on the edge of nowhere know it exists? She let that sit in the broadcast frequency for a moment. Here's what I'll tell you for free. We're going to spread it. Not the information, the knowledge that it exists. That there's a map and someone's keeping it. And if you want to chase it, you're going to spend the next however many 100 years chasing something that keeps dividing and expanding and moving into territories you don't have charts for. She thought about the lullaby, the 4 notes descending and the 5th that resolves. Because that's what we do. We copy things, we share things, we carry things forward even when no one asked us to. It's not a strategy, it's just what we're like. The presence was silent for a long time. Then it said, in its accented but functional English, "The archive cannot be carried by a distributed system. It requires a single continuous biological line." That was true, Yenny said, until now. You'll want to think about what it means that it's not true anymore. Another silence. Longer. The sensor returns were changing. The presence was ascending slowly by degrees. Not in defeat. In something more like recalibration. The long, patient reassessment of an entity that has operated on one assumption for 6 centuries and has just encountered data that requires a new model. This is not resolved, the presence said. No, Yenny agreed. But it's different now. We made it different. That counts for something. The light above the shelf changed. The vast geometry of the presence caught the atmosphere differently as it rose. Something almost like the way dawn changes color, orange to gold to that specific pale blue that belongs entirely to the hour just before full day. It rose until the garrison sensors could no longer resolve it. It rose until there was nothing above the Aran shelf but sky. The snow kept falling. The distress response had said coming, hold. The reinforcement arrived 22 hours later, a light carrier with 2 frigates and a very confused fleet admiral who had received a fragmentary signal that mentioned first contact, biological transfer, and a 600-year pursuit, and had spent the entire transit arguing with himself about which part of that to address first. He found Garrison Aran intact, all 41 personnel present and accounted for, and Commander Rel drinking coffee on the eastern wall, watching the sky, in the way of someone who has decided that watching the sky is now part of her job description. He found Harrow with 17 new notebooks full of data, and a request for a research budget that the Admiral's eyes stopped being able to process about a third of the way down the first page. He found Corporal Yenny Draz at her standard post in the corridor outside the infirmary, sitting on her folding chair with a cup of cold coffee and a quiet expression and the sphere in her jacket pocket that she touched, absently, every so often, the way you touch a thing that has changed what you are, and you're still finding the edges of the change. He did not find the girl. The girl had been gone since Harrow had gotten her out through the secondary access tunnel into a white expanse of snow with no wind and a sky gone suddenly, unexpectedly clear. Harrow had watched her cross 50 meters of open shelf toward nothing visible, nothing his instruments could resolve. She had walked without hurrying, without looking back, which was the thing that would stay with him. That she didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, because she knew she didn't need to. She had made the choice she came to make. She had found the person she came to find. She had set down the very old thing in the right hands, and now she was going wherever it is that things go when they have finally, completely, finished what they came to do. In the spot where she had been when Harrow lost sight of her, there was nothing. No tracks. The snow was clean and unbroken in every direction. And in that nothing he felt very specifically the weight of everything the archive had given him, a glimpse of all those worlds, all those minds, all that stubborn, improbable carrying on, and he understood for the first time, standing in the wind on the Aran shelf, what the archive was actually for. Not a weapon, not a navigational tool, not intelligence. A reminder, an insistence, a document that said, look at how many times the light has kept going. Look at how many ways there are to be a thing that persists. Look at the scope of the record and tell me it wasn't worth keeping. He went back inside. He made himself a cup of coffee. He picked up his notebook and started, carefully, at the beginning. The fleet admiral's debrief lasted 3 days. It produced a report of 412 pages, a legal task force, a xenobiological subcommittee, and one classified annex that the admiral sealed under his personal authorization and marked not for review for 50 years, which was the thing he did when he encountered something that the present moment was not equipped to contain. The annex was 3 sentences long. The subject transferred an archive of unknown biological origin and unclear scope into the neural tissue of a human carrier. The transfer appears to be stable and non-harmful. The subject should be monitored and protected, and the nature of what she carries should be communicated to her in full. The last line of the annex was not standard debrief language. The admiral added it himself, at 200 hours on the 3rd day, after a long conversation with Yenny Draz in which she had told him, quietly and without drama, what it felt like to hold the record of everything that had ever chosen to keep going. He wrote, "She already knows, she's fine. She's been fine since the beginning, let her do her job." Yenny Draz re-enlisted 6 months later. She was assigned to the Outer Survey Division, which took her to the edges of the mapped territories and beyond, which was, she felt, exactly right. She carried the sphere. She carried the archive, distributed through her nervous system like the deepest memory she'd ever had. And every now and then, in the dark of a transit corridor, in the silence before a landing, on some unnamed shelf of rock and ice at the edge of something no human had named yet, she would hum the 4 descending notes and the 5th one that resolves into something larger. She did it once in the commissary on a carrier in deep transit without meaning to, just humming to herself, not thinking, and the engineer 3 seats down looked up from her food and said, "Where's that from? That melody. I've never heard it before, but I know it somehow." Yenny looked at her. "I don't know," she said. "I think it's very old." The engineer went back to her food. Then, after a moment, "Can you hum it again? I want to see if I can learn it." Yenny Draz hummed it again. The engineer listened carefully, and then she hummed it back, imperfect on the first try, closer on the second, and exact on the third, the 4 descending notes and the 5th that opens into everything. And by the time they made port, she was humming it to herself in the corridor without noticing she was doing it. That is how it spreads. That is how it always spread. Not in archives or databases or sealed classified annexes. In the back of the throat, traveling at the speed of human attention, passed from person to person in the unremarkable moments of ordinary days. The oldest record in 7 systems, distributed across a species that copies things and shares things and carries things forward without being asked. Still going. Still going. Still going.